Have you ever felt that something just wasn't right? A strange, nagging feeling in your gut that made no sense at the time, until you realized it had just saved you from disaster? Some people call it intuition, others say it's instinct. Whatever it is, there are moments in life when that inexplicable sense of unease can be the difference between safety and tragedy. It's the kind of feeling that makes you stop walking down a dark alley, hesitate before getting into a stranger's car, or double check on a loved one, only to realize you just avoided something truly terrifying. From near kidnappings and fatal accidents to eerie premonitions that defy logic, these real-life stories from Reddit True Vault prove that sometimes listening to that little voice inside your head can change your fate forever. And to start, imagine this. You're half asleep in a car, cruising down the highway. Then, out of nowhere, the driver goes silent, and you realize the car is speeding downhill, completely out of control. If you enjoy true, spine-chilling stories like these, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking content from Reddit True Vault. Your support keeps these stories coming. Story number 1. The driver had a seizure. My gut instinct saved lives. It started with silence. The car had been filled with the usual road trip noise, music playing softly, the occasional small talk, the rhythmic hum of tires against the pavement. But suddenly, everything felt wrong. I was half asleep in the passenger seat when this weird, heavy feeling hit me. Like something was just off. I cracked an eye open. Mike was still driving, but something didn't look right. His hands were locked on the wheel, gripping it too tightly. His whole body looked stiff, almost like he was holding his breath. "Mike," I said. "Nothing." His head tilted back slightly. Then, his body jerked. Arms twitching, legs slamming onto the gas pedal. He was having a seizure while the car was flying down the highway. My brain short-circuited. The speedometer shot past 70. The road ahead was sloping downhill, an intersection coming up fast. I lunged. One hand grabbed the wheel, jerking it away from oncoming traffic. The other yanked the parking brake. The tires screamed against the road. The whole car fishtailed, metal groaning under the force. And then, with a final lurch, we slammed onto the shoulder and stopped. For a second, all I heard was my own heartbeat. Then, I turned to Mike. He was still convulsing, but breathing. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and called 911. Mike didn't remember any of it, but I did. I remembered the silence, that twist in my gut, the feeling that something was wrong before my eyes even saw it. Sometimes, your instincts don't just warn you, they save you. Next up, a house party that should have been fun, until one guest had a gut feeling to leave. Story number 2. The party that turned into a shooting. My gut feeling saved me. I should have been there. That thought still haunts me. If I hadn't listened to that creeping, unexplainable sense of unease, I don't know if I'd be telling this story right now. It started when my best friend, Mia, and I got invited to this huge house party. It was supposed to be the party of the year. Big crowd, free drinks, all the cool kids attending. Mia was hyped. Me? Not so much. I couldn't explain why, but something just felt off. Maybe it was the way people were talking about the party, hyping it up like some underground event. Maybe it was because I barely knew the host. Or maybe it was just one of those gut feelings you can't shake. Mia kept pushing me to go, so I gave in, kind of. I stalled, told her I needed to change outfits. Then I forgot my purse. Then I took way too long fixing my makeup. I was grasping at excuses, hoping that feeling in my chest would fade. But it didn't. It only got worse. And then, sirens, flashing lights raced past my house. Police cars, ambulances. Something bad had just gone down. Mia and I stared at each other. Then her phone buzzed. A text from a friend already at the party. Someone just got shot. Holy SHD. Asterisk. Turns out, a guy had walked in on his wife cheating on him and snapped. He pulled a gun in the middle of the party. 3 shots fired. 1 person dead. I sat there, my whole body cold. I should have been there. I didn't know if it was luck, chance, or something else entirely. But that night, I promised myself I'd never ignore my instincts again. Next up, a McDonald's parking lot, and a stranger who seemed way too interested in a teenager traveling alone. Story number 3. The stranger at McDonald's. A split-second decision saved me. When I was 13, I didn't know what to call it. That weird, crawling sensation in my stomach. That tightness in my chest that told me something wasn't right. Now, at 26, I know exactly what it was. Gut instinct. Sixth sense. Whatever you want to call it. It saved me. It was a normal morning. My mom and I were on our way to pick up a kitten from a breeder a few hours away. We stopped at a shopping center, McDonald's for me, Starbucks for her. Instead of walking across the parking lot to meet her, I decided to wait outside alone. That's when he pulled up. An old station wagon. 2 kids in the back seat. The driver, a man in his 40s, leaned over the passenger seat, rolled down the window, and smiled at me. "Where are you headed, kid?" I froze. Maplewood," I said. His smile widened. "No way. That's where I'm going too. You want a ride?" My stomach dropped. I didn't know why, but everything about him felt wrong. The way his eyes darted around. The way he spoke too fast, like he was rushing me into saying yes. I looked at the kids in the back seat. They just sat there, stiff, silent. Something was really wrong. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. So instead, I did the first thing I could think of. I pointed at a random woman walking out of Starbucks. "That's my mom right there," I blurted out. His face changed instantly. No more fake smile, just a flicker of panic. Without another word, he slammed the car into drive and sped off. I never saw him again, but I still think about those kids. They looked so off. Were they okay? Were they even his? I don't know. And I don't want to know what would have happened if I got in that car. Story number 4. The girl who almost got kidnapped. A gut feeling saved her. 2 years ago, something happened that still makes my skin crawl. At the time, I didn't fully understand it, but looking back, I realized my gut instinct saved my life. It was late, around 9 p.m., and I was walking home alone after a local event in Springfield. The town was small and quiet, and I'd walked this route dozens of times before. But that night felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the empty streets and the occasional flickering streetlight made my stomach twist. Then, I noticed it. A black SUV slowly passed by me. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another car heading home. But then, it circled back. My heart started pounding. The vehicle crept toward me, its headlights dimming as it rolled to a stop just a few feet away. The window slid down, revealing a man in his mid-40s. He had an unsettling smile, too friendly, too forced. "Hey there," he said. "You need a ride?" Every instinct in me screamed a no. My fingers clenched around my phone, and I knew I had to act fast. My brain didn't have time to process. My body just reacted. I held my phone up to my ear, and in the loudest voice I could manage, I blurted out, "Dad? Yeah, I see your car now. I'm coming over." The man's face changed instantly. His grin disappeared. His expression flickered with something like frustration, or was it fear? Without another word, he slammed on the gas and sped off down the road. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Then I ran. I sprinted the rest of the way home, locked my door, and didn't sleep a wink that night. To this day, I don't know what his true intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to find out. But I do know one thing. If I hadn't trusted my gut, I might not be here to tell this story. Next up, sometimes that strange gut feeling doesn't just save you. It helps you see danger before it even unfolds. Story number 5. The mysterious man and the keychain. I almost got drugged. It happened about 7 months ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. That night, my gut feeling wasn't just a whisper, it was a full-blown alarm. And thank God I listened. I was at a bar downtown with some friends, celebrating a coworker's birthday. After a while, I wandered over to the bar to order another drink. That's when he slid onto the stool next to me. A clean-cut guy, mid-30s, nothing outwardly creepy about him. He smiled and asked me how to sign up for karaoke. I told him and turned back to my drink, expecting the conversation to end there. But he kept talking. Casual small talk at first, asking if I liked the place, what songs I'd sing. Then, mid-sentence, he suddenly pointed behind me. "Hey, isn't that your friend over there?" he said. It was instinct, pure, gut-wrenching instinct, that made me snap my head back toward him almost immediately. And that's when I saw it. His hand was gripping a small, metallic canister attached to his keychain. He was twisting it open. I locked eyes with him. His expression didn't change. No guilt, no embarrassment, just this unsettling blankness. He slowly screwed the lid back on, like nothing happened. I didn't say a word. I didn't cause a scene. I just let my fingers slide my drink a little farther away from me. A few minutes later, he performed his karaoke song, some forgettable 80s ballad, and then disappeared. I don't have proof. I'll never know for sure. But I know, and I know one thing for certain. If I had looked away for just a second longer, I might not have been the one telling this story. Next up, sometimes that gut feeling doesn't come from people. It comes from the very places we think we're safest. Story number 6. The birthday party that almost ended in horror. A gut feeling saved me. I was 16 at the time. It was a Friday night, and my friend Emily had invited me to her little sister's birthday party. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small gathering at their house with family and a few friends. At first, I was excited. I didn't know her family very well, but Emily was one of my closest friends, so I figured it would be a fun night. But the second I walked into that house, something inside me screamed that something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it. Everyone seemed normal enough. Emily's mom was setting up snacks, her little sister was bouncing around happily, and a few other kids were playing video games in the living room. But there was something about the atmosphere that made my stomach twist. And then, I noticed him, Emily's stepdad. He wasn't doing anything outright suspicious, but there was something off about the way he moved, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long on some of the girls at the party, including me. The way he leaned in too close when he talked, how his smile felt wrong. I brushed it off at first, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was just an awkward guy. Maybe I was imagining it, but that feeling wouldn't go away. After about an hour, I told Emily I wasn't feeling well and needed to head home. She seemed a little disappointed, but didn't question it. As I was leaving, I caught one last glimpse of her stepdad. He was watching me from the hallway, that same unsettling smirk on his face. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I ever stepped foot in that house. A few months later, news broke out that Emily's stepdad had been arrested. He had been caught assaulting two teenage girls around my age, girls who had been at that same party. I never told Emily why I really left early that night. I don't know what happened to her after everything went down. But to this day, I still wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed longer? Maybe nothing, maybe something. All I know is that, for the first time in my life, I truly listened to that gut feeling. And I have no doubt in my mind, it saved me. But sometimes, a gut feeling doesn't just save you. It can stop an unthinkable tragedy before it even begins. Story number 7. The doctor was about to discharge me, but my gut told me something was wrong. I've always been a logical person. I don't believe in superstitions, omens, or any of that mystical stuff. But this is the one time in my life where I have no explanation, other than that gut feeling saved my life. It started when I woke up one morning feeling off. My breathing was shallow, my heart was racing, and there was this deep, uncomfortable pressure in my chest. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe lingering effects from a bad cold I'd had the week before. But as the hours passed, that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Something wasn't right. So, I went to the ER. They ran a chest x-ray, an ECG, and blood tests for clots. Everything came back normal. The doctor told me it was probably just anxiety or post-viral symptoms and that I'd be fine to go home. But I wasn't fine. I could feel it in my bones. I looked at the doctor and said, "I know this sounds crazy, but I just have a bad feeling. Something's wrong. Can we check again?" To my surprise, the doctor actually listened. He sighed, nodded, and said, "All right, let's run one more test, just to be safe." That test? A VQ scan, a nuclear imaging test that can detect blood clots in the lungs. It found multiple pulmonary embolisms, life-threatening blood clots lodged in both of my lungs. If I had gone home that night, there's a high chance I wouldn't have woken up the next morning. The doctors immediately started me on blood thinners, and I spent the next week in the hospital under close watch. Even now, years later, I still don't understand what made me push for that extra test. Logically, I should have just accepted the results and gone home. But something inside me wouldn't let me. And I'm alive today because I listened. And sometimes, a gut feeling doesn't just save you. It can save the people you love too. Story number 8. A mother turns back and saves her father from a stroke. 3 years ago, I learned to never ignore that deep, unshakable gut feeling. Because of it, my father is still alive today. That evening was just like any other. After dinner, my family and I decided to take a short walk around our neighborhood. It was peaceful, the air was cool, the sun was setting, and everything felt normal. Or at least, it should have. We had barely walked 50 meters from the house when, out of nowhere, a wave of unease hit me. It wasn't a sudden noise or anything I could explain. It was just a deep, nagging feeling in my chest, like something was wrong. I slowed down. My feet felt heavy, like something was pulling me back. Then, without thinking, I blurted out, "I think I'm gonna go check on Dad." My mom and brother looked at me weirdly. "Emma, we literally just left," my brother said. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I turned and ran back to the house, and that's when I saw him. My dad was still sitting in his chair, but something was terribly wrong. His eyes were wide open, but unfocused. His body was stiff, completely frozen in place. His mouth was moving slightly, but no words were coming out. I knew in that instant he was having a stroke. I screamed for my mom. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived. They rushed him to the hospital and immediately started treatment. The doctors later told us that if we had arrived, even a few minutes later, the damage to his brain could have been irreversible. The fact that we caught it so early saved his life. I still think about that night often. I have no idea what made me turn around. But I do know this. If I had ignored that feeling, my dad wouldn't be here today. But not everyone gets that chance. Sometimes, a gut feeling is the only thing standing between life and death. Story number 9. The truck crashed right behind us. My gut feeling was right. A year ago, when I had just turned 18, I learned that sometimes your gut feeling is the only thing standing between you and disaster. It was late evening, and my best friend Liam and I had just left a convenience store. We weren't in a rush, just walking home, laughing over some stupid joke he had made. The streets were quiet, just the occasional car passing by. Nothing felt out of place. At least, that's what I thought. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. A sudden wave of unease. Like someone had poured ice water down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder. A rusty old truck was coming up behind us. It wasn't swerving or driving recklessly, but something about it made my skin crawl. That feeling only grew stronger. My chest tightened, my hands felt clammy. I had no reason to panic, but something inside me was screaming, "Move." Now, without a second thought, I grabbed Liam's arm. "Come on, let's cut through here," I said, pulling him toward a narrow alleyway between two buildings. The moment our feet hit the pavement inside the alley, we heard it. A violent screeching sound, tires skidding hard against asphalt. Then boom, a deafening crash. Metal twisting, glass shattering, the unmistakable impact of something massive hitting the ground. We spun around. The truck, the same one that had been right behind us, had flipped onto its side. Its front end was completely destroyed, smoke billowing from the hood. And the scariest part? It had crashed right where we had been standing just seconds ago. Liam and I just stood there, frozen. If we hadn't moved, if I hadn't listened to that gut feeling, we would have been right under it. Even now, I don't know what made me react that way. But I do know this. That was the night I stopped ignoring my instincts. But some gut feelings don't just help you escape danger. They can change the fate of an entire family. Story number 10. A mother's gut feeling saved her son from tragedy. I never considered myself an overly paranoid person. But the day my gut feeling kicked in, I realized that sometimes listening to that little voice in your head is the difference between life and death. It was a normal morning. At least, it started that way. I dropped my 3-year-old son, Ethan, off at daycare before heading to work, just like I did every morning. The place wasn't anything fancy, but the kids seemed happy, and the woman who ran it had been in the business for years. I had no reason to worry, but that day something felt off. I had just sat down at my desk when a wave of unease hit me out of nowhere. My stomach clenched, my hands started to shake. My mind kept flashing back to Ethan. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overreacting. But the feeling only grew worse, gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove straight back to the daycare. And when I got there, my heart nearly stopped. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the daycare provider was asleep on the couch, completely oblivious. And out in the backyard, the kids, including my son, were running around the edge of the swimming pool. Ethan was laughing, completely unaware of the danger. There was no fence, no adult supervision, nothing stopping them from falling in. One wrong step, and he could have drowned. I didn't hesitate. I ran outside, scooped Ethan into my arms, and immediately started calling out to the other kids. "Come here, right now," I shouted, waving them away from the pool. Some of them listened, but a few were still too caught up in their game. My heart pounded as I grabbed the nearest child by the wrist and pulled them back to safety. Then, I turned and stormed inside. The daycare provider was still asleep on the couch. I shook her shoulder hard. "Wake up." The kids were out by the pool. She jolted awake, looking confused. "Huh? What? Oh, they're fine," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes like I had just interrupted a nap. Not a life-threatening situation. I was livid. They could have drowned. "Where the hell were you?" She blinked at me, still groggy. She had no idea what had just almost happened. I wasn't going to waste another second. I rounded up every child I could, pulling them away from the backyard before calling one of the other parents I knew and telling them what was happening. That was the last day Ethan, or any other kid, ever set foot in that place. Call it mother's intuition, call it luck, call it whatever you want. All I know is, that day, something saved my son's life. But sometimes, a gut feeling doesn't just save one person. It saves an entire family from tragedy. Story number 11. My dad changed plans at the last minute, and it saved our lives. You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right with you? You can't explain it, but it gnaws at the back of your mind, demanding your attention. My dad isn't a superstitious guy. He's the type who sticks to a plan once he makes it. So when he suddenly changed our entire route on Thanksgiving morning, it was weird enough that my mom and I both gave him looks. We were supposed to take Interstate 47, a straight shot to my grandma's house, about a 3-hour drive. But as we were loading up the car, Dad just froze. His brow furrowed, and he glanced at the road map in his hands. Yeah, this was before smartphones. You know what? He said, almost to himself. Let's take the back roads instead. My mom blinked. Why? That'll add almost an hour to the trip. I don't know, he muttered, shaking his head. I don't like it. Now, my dad's not the dramatic type. He doesn't make random decisions based on a feeling. But something about the way he said it, so firm, so certain, made my mom shrug and say, all right, whatever makes you comfortable. So we took the long way. Hours later, by the time we arrived at my grandma's house, the news was everywhere. A massive pileup on Interstate 47. A semi-truck lost control on an icy patch, jackknifed it across the road, and set off a chain reaction crash. Over 15 cars involved. Multiple fatalities. The exact time of the accident? Right when we would have been there. I remember the way my dad gripped the arm of his chair while watching the report. He didn't say anything, but I could see it in his face. He knew. Somehow he just knew. I don't know what told him to change the route that morning, but I do know that because of it, we're still here today. Sometimes, gut feelings don't just nudge you in the right direction. They keep you from walking straight into disaster. Story number 12. My brother and I were never close, but his call saved my life. I never got along with my brother. Ever since we were kids, we'd fight about everything. Who got the bigger slice of cake? Who had to take out the trash? Who was mom and dad's favorite? It was obviously him. By the time we both moved out, we barely spoke. It wasn't outright hatred, just distance. That's why, when he called me out of the blue one night during my first year of college, I almost didn't pick up. It had been a rough semester. Stress, loneliness, the crushing weight of expectations. I felt like I was drowning. That night, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at a bottle of pills in my hand. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I just felt done. Then my phone rang. I blinked at the screen. My brother's name. For a second, I almost ignored it. But some instinct, made me swipe to answer. Hey. I said, my voice flat. There was silence. Then, in the most awkward, uncharacteristically hesitant tone, he asked, are you okay? I almost laughed. What? Why are you calling me? He hesitated. I don't know. I just had this weird feeling. Like I needed to check on you. That's dumb, huh? I stared at the pill bottle. My grip loosened. It wasn't some dramatic moment where I instantly broke down crying and confessed everything. But something shifted. The sheer randomness of it, the fact that he, of all people, had called me, was enough to snap me out of the spiral I was in. We ended up talking for almost an hour. Just about stupid things. Old childhood stories, dumb TV shows, even arguing about who actually was mom and dad's favorite. By the time we hung up, the pills were back in the drawer. I never told him. I don't think I ever will. But to this day, I wonder, what made him call me that night? Some things in life don't have explanations. But that call, it saved me. But sometimes, gut feelings don't just save one life. They can prevent a much bigger tragedy. Story number 13. My dad warned me about the saw. 5 seconds later, I almost lost my life. Growing up, my dad was always overly cautious. Safety first, Adam, was practically his catchphrase. At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic. But one day in our garage, his gut feeling proved to be dead right. We were cutting lumber for a backyard project. My dad was working the table saw, and I was standing right beside him, watching. I wasn't even touching anything, just observing, waiting for him to hand me the next piece of wood. Then, out of nowhere, he stopped. Adam, step back, he said, his voice firm. I frowned. Why? I don't know, he muttered. Just step back. Stand behind me. I sighed, rolling my eyes, but I stepped behind him anyway. 5 seconds later, The saw hit a hidden knot in the wood. There was a loud crack, a horrible screeching noise, and suddenly the blade flew off the machine, right toward the spot where I had just been standing. I barely had time to process what happened. The blade slammed into the garage wall with a loud thunk, embedding itself deep into the wood. My dad and I just stood there in stunned silence, staring at the thing. If I had been standing there just a moment longer, I swallowed hard. My dad turned to me, his face pale. "That's why," he finally said. That was the day I stopped rolling my eyes at my dad's safety rules. And that was the day I learned to always listen when someone has a gut feeling. Instincts can kick in anywhere, even in your own home. But sometimes, they don't just save you, they save everyone around you. Story number 14. The eerie silence in the forest. I ran for my life. I've always loved hiking alone. There's something about being completely surrounded by nature, away from people, that just clears my head. That day, I was deep in the rainforest, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells of the wild. At least, until the sounds disappeared. One moment, the jungle was alive. The hum of insects, the calls of birds, the rustling of leaves. The next, absolute silence. I froze mid-step. At first, I thought maybe I just imagined it. I stood still, listening. Nothing. No buzzing mosquitoes, no distant chirping, not even the wind. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. That's when the fear hit me. My body reacted before my brain could. Run. I turned and bolted back the way I came, crashing through the underbrush like a madman. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. Not that there was anything else to hear. I didn't stop running until I broke through the tree line and stumbled into camp, gasping for air. One of the guides saw me and rushed over. "What happened?" he asked. I stammered out something about the silence, how it felt wrong. His face darkened. "When the jungle goes quiet," he said slowly, "it means a big predator is nearby. Jaguar, maybe, or something worse. I still don't know what was out there that day, and I don't want to. But not everyone listens to their instincts, and sometimes the price for ignoring them is far too high." Story number 15. The security guard's gut feeling and how it prevented an armed robbery. Working the night shift at a gas station isn't exactly thrilling, but after years on the job, I thought I had seen it all. That was until one night changed everything. It was around 2 a.m., the dead hours. I was leaning against the counter, sipping a cold coffee, when the door swung open. A man walked in, mid-30s, hoodie up, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. Something felt off. It wasn't just the way he avoided eye contact. It was the way he moved, too stiff, too calculated. My gut tightened. Something's not right. I didn't know why, but instead of my usual, "Hey, how's it going?" I stepped back, putting distance between us. At the same time, my hand hovered over the silent alarm button under the counter. Just in case. The guy reached the counter, hesitated for a second, then pulled out a gun. "Empty the register." Now, my heart pounded, but my finger had already pressed the alarm. I raised my hands, keeping my movement slow. Outside, I saw headlights. A police cruiser had just pulled into the lot. Talk about timing. The second the guy noticed the cops, he panicked, shoving the gun back into his hoodie and bolting for the exit. Officers rushed in, tackled him to the ground, and within seconds, it was over. Turns out, he had already hit 2 gas stations that night. I could have been next, but not everyone gets a chance to react in time. Sometimes, everything changes in the blink of an eye. Story number 16. A kid's gut feeling, and how it saved him from being kidnapped. When I was 8, my parents finally let me walk to the corner store alone. It was just a few blocks away, and I had done it plenty of times before, but that day felt different. The store was quiet. I bought a candy bar, stuffed it into my pocket, and started heading home. That's when I noticed the truck. It was parked on the side of the street, old and rusty, engine still running. I wouldn't have thought twice about it until I saw the driver. A man, probably in his 40s, was sitting inside, and he was staring right at me. I slowed down, pretending to check my pocket, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a normal smile. Something about it sent a chill straight down my spine. My feet wanted to keep moving, but my instincts were screaming at me to stop. I glanced around. No one else was on the street. I was alone. Then, the worst thing happened. The driver opened his door. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just sprinted. My heart pounded. My breath was ragged. But I didn't care. I just needed to get home. I could hear the sound of the truck's engine revving behind me. I didn't know if he was following me or not. I didn't stop to check. I only stopped when I reached my front yard, practically crashing through the door. My mom looked up, confused. What's wrong? I didn't know how to explain it. All I knew was that if I had stayed 1 second longer, something bad would have happened. But sometimes, gut feelings aren't just about personal danger, they can be about the people around you, too. Story number 17. The man who followed us through the store. My gut feeling was right. 3 years ago, I took my little sister shopping at a grocery store near our house. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just some snacks and a few essentials. But something felt off. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But after a few aisles, I knew someone was following us. There was a man, maybe in his late 40s, walking just a little too close. I first noticed him in the produce section, then again in the snack aisle, and again in the frozen foods. At one point, I tested my suspicion. I took a random turn into an aisle we didn't need to go into. He followed. Every time I stopped, he stopped. Every time I moved, he moved. My stomach twisted. My heart was racing, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to scare my sister. I whispered to her, "Let's go check out." We walked toward the registers. I glanced back. He was still there. That was it. I didn't care if I was overreacting. I grabbed my sister's hand and walked straight to a store employee. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I think that man is following us." The employee's face darkened. They glanced over my shoulder, then immediately called for security. Turns out, I wasn't being paranoid. The man had been reported before for questionable behavior around kids in the store. Security escorted him out, and the manager apologized profusely, offering to walk us to our car. As we left, my sister squeezed my hand and whispered, "How did you know?" I didn't have an answer. I just knew. And sometimes, listening to that gut feeling can be the difference between life and death. Story number 18. The student who trusted his gut, and it saved his life. The morning felt strange. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was off. It was just another school day, yet my stomach churned with unease. I always took the same route, down Maple Street, past the old bookstore, then through a shortcut by a construction site. It was the fastest way to school. But that morning, I hesitated at the intersection. For no reason at all. I just didn't want to go that way. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Nothing was different. No roadblocks, no sketchy people, no real reason to feel uneasy. But the feeling wouldn't go away. So, at the last second, I turned left instead of right. It meant an extra 5 minutes of walking, but I just couldn't shake the thought that something bad was going to happen. And then, boom, the ground shook. A deafening crash echoed through the streets. I whipped my head around. My usual path, the exact spot I would have been walking through just minutes before, was now buried under a collapsed scaffolding. Metal beams, planks of wood, and shattered glass were everywhere. A whole section of the construction site had caved in. I stood there, frozen. People rushed out of nearby stores. A car screeched to a halt. Someone screamed. I could barely hear it over the pounding in my chest. If I had ignored my gut feeling, I would have been right under all of that. Later that day, the news reported that 2 workers had been injured in the accident. If I had been there, I don't even want to think about it. Was it luck? Coincidence? I don't know. All I know is, from that day forward, I never ignored that feeling again. Sometimes, there's no logic behind a gut feeling, but when it saves your life, do you really need an explanation? A strange feeling, an unexplainable pull, a sudden urge to turn back, and in the end, it saves a life. These stories prove that our gut feelings aren't just paranoia. They might be the very thing that keeps us alive. Have you ever had a moment where your intuition warned you of danger? Share your story in the comments. And if you love hearing true, spine-chilling tales like these, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more from Reddit True Vault. Trust your instincts. They just might save you.